We owe a debt of gratitude to Yamaha. Say what you will, but none of the other big four manufacturers have taken the risks that Yamaha took to save sport bikes. They've maintained their commitment in MotoGP, developing an inline-4 machine and V4 platform in tandem. They've kept racing in World Superbike, and they've developed and built new engine architecture. And in my opinion, they are largely responsible for saving sport bikes in the 2020s, keeping the thrill alive. And it all comes down to two motorcycle models that they launched this decade. Every era of motorcycling has a few machines that define it. The 70s had the CB750, the 90s had the R1 and the Fireblade, the 2000s had the mighty Gixxer, but if you zoom in on the 2020s, two bikes stand out as the most important of the decade. They weren't the fastest or the most exotic, but they were the ones that made the biggest impact on what sport bikes look like today. I am of course talking about the Yamaha R7 and R9. Now stick with me here, it's not just gonna be a glaze fest. Look, together, these two bikes reshaped what it means to ride a sport bike. They helped redefine racing categories, and they replaced legends, and they kept the category alive when it was on the brink of irrelevance. So today, I want to walk you through why I think the Yamaha R7 and R9 are the most important motorcycles of this decade, and why without them, the sport bike world may have died out altogether. Let's talk about the R7 first, a motorcycle that I've owned as a giveaway bike here on Yami Noob and have extensive experience with, because that bike has actually been a shock success for Yamaha in the last 5 years. I first bought it back in 2021 when it was starting to be this new twins bike category. But look, to understand the importance of the R7, you gotta go back to the debut of the Aprilia RS660. When that bike came out, it created an entirely new middleweight identity. It was not a 600cc super sport in the traditional sense. It had a parallel twin, it made good torque, and it was approachable and fun to ride. Fun fact, I had that one as a giveaway bike back in 2021 as well, and that's when I really started reading the tea leaves on how sport bikes were going to change. The RS660 proved that this recipe could work, but it was the Yamaha R7 that took the idea mainstream. Because, come on, let's be honest, a lot of people have reservations about the reliability of an Italian motorcycle, and they may not even have a local dealer nearby. But a Yamaha, you can get that thing serviced anywhere, and they made a critically important move. The R7 shipped with Yamaha's CP2 twin, the same engine that had already proven itself in the MT-07. It was affordable, reliable, easy to modify, it was the perfect platform. But unlike the RS660, which did feel like a bit of a boutique item because that engine had not been cross-platformed yet, the R7 was built for scale. Yamaha priced it really aggressively when it came out in 2021, under the $9,000 mark, and they made sure dealers could actually stock them, and they pushed it both in the street and racing context. This was the bike that took the twins concept from an experiment to a full-on movement. Suddenly, you had club racers buying R7s by the truckload. Twins Cup grids started filling up. Aftermarket companies had a reason to develop parts. And most importantly, riders who might have otherwise been scared off by the intensity of a 600 now had a clear entry point into sport bike riding. Sure, the category was there with the SV650, but people love a brand new platform, and the R7 proved immediately competitive. The Aprilia RS660 may have lit the spark, but the R7 definitely poured gasoline on that fire. Without it, the whole Twins Cup thing might have just remained a niche curiosity, but with the R7, it became a central pillar of sport bike racing and riding in the 2020s. I can't tell you how many riders I've personally met on track who decided to dip their toes into sport bike riding with the R7. Or just a bunch of old club racing fogies who have an R7 because it's just cheap to run. And consider how many bikes similar to the R7 debuted right after it. The GSX 8R, parallel twin, 270 crank, Daytona 660, 3-cylinder but still the same idea, all following the same formula. Now look, if the R7 set the foundation, the R9 was the follow-up act that cemented that new order. For years, the middleweight supersport category was defined by one engine. You already know what I'm gonna say. It's the screaming inline four. The big four all had their own bikes, but these bikes were razor sharp, high strung, and designed to live way up in the revs. And they were also increasingly irrelevant. Emission standards made them harder to sell, insurance premiums kept young riders away, and the economy is in shambles, so nobody could afford these things. And for street riding, they just weren't practical anymore. The good times from the mid-2000s just couldn't last forever. That's where the R9 comes in. Yamaha knew they could not keep the R6 going in perpetuity, so instead of trying to keep selling the same formula in a shrinking market, they redefined what a supersport could be. The R9 took the CP3 triple from the MT09, tuned it for sport duty, wrapped it in proper supersport ergonomics and fairings. The result is a bike that had the look and feel of a supersport, but with the usability and mid-range torque that actually made sense in the real world. If you want a super deep dive on the Yamaha R9, we did a really well put together review. I highly recommend you go and check that out. The R9 isn't chasing peak horsepower. It was chasing rideability, fun, and track day relevance. And in doing so, it ushered in this entirely new category, what we're calling, and many other people are, the new generation supersport. It's a class of bikes that can deliver thrills, performance, but they don't demand the financial or physical sacrifice of an old school 600. In many ways, the R9 did for supersports what the R7 did for twins. It turned an idea into a reality, and then others followed suit. Other manufacturers basically had no choice but to follow. You see the same pattern emerging from the Ducati V2S that lit the spark in an Italian way, and then Yamaha taking it mainstream with a cheaper alternative that's more approachable for the average person. In my opinion, we're now on the cusp of this new generation supersport category taking off. And much like the R7 was followed by a litany of other bikes that resembled it, I bet you we're gonna see the same with this R9. I'm still waiting on Triumph's Daytona 800. Maybe someday, boys. Maybe someday. Now, I want to let you know that if you're enjoying our content, we're dropping daily videos every day. Hit me a like down below on the video. It goes a long way for the all-seeing algorithm. If you want to support the show, you can become a member on my website, yammynoob.co. As a thank you for your support, we give away motorcycles. This Yamaha R9 seated next to me is actually up for grabs, and the sweepstakes ends in September. Make sure you head over to the website and learn more about this giveaway. I've actually done 68 different motorcycles over the last 5 years, and I have no plans on slowing down. One of the headline stories of the 2020s was the end of the R6 as a street bike. The R6 had dominated the middleweight supersport world for 2 decades. It was a legend on the street, and it was even better on track, but the writing was on the wall. Emissions regulations made it nearly impossible to keep selling, sales were declining, and the cost of development was just hard to justify. I mean, we all remember that last update it got, right? It had the R1 dash from like 2009. They gave it like really rudimentary TC. That was definitely a part spin special. Looked pretty cool though. The R7 and R9 gave Yamaha the perfect excuse to finally retire the R6 without abandoning the riders who loved what it represented. The R7 provided the entry-level supersport experience at a price people could actually afford, and the R9 provided the next step up with more track-capable performance that still made sense on the road. Both of these bikes together covered the ground the R6 once held, and they did it in a way that felt kind of fresh instead of nostalgic, and they actually found new customers by widening this gap. Keep in mind, an R7 is still a sub $10,000 MSRP supersport styled motorcycle. And come on, what supersport bike looks better than Yamaha R bikes? None of them. If Yamaha had simply killed the R6 without offering an alternative, the supersport category might have just collapsed altogether. But with the R7 and the R9, Yamaha didn't just preserve it, they kind of reinvented it. There was a time in the mid-2010s when it looked like supersports were pretty much on life support. Sales were down, adventure bikes and naked bikes were everywhere, and the average age of riders was climbing. And the new generation of riders just didn't seem that interested in 600s or 1000s. In my opinion, the R7 and R9 reversed the trend. These bikes widened the funnel. They made it easier for new riders to step into the supersport world without feeling like they were buying something outdated or impractical. The R3 gave beginners their first taste, myself included. The R7 offered a real step into supersports, and the R9 gives you a serious but approachable next level. That progression keeps people engaged, and it keeps them wanting more. It kept them showing up at track days, and in my opinion, Yamaha has the best and most clear pipeline of sport bike progression. You go R3, R7, R9, then R1 if you want to go crazy. If that's not the best power progression ladder of any manufacturer, I don't know what else could be. Without bikes like the R7 and R9, it's not hard to imagine a world where sport bikes just shrink into irrelevance and dominated only by expensive exotics and shrinking grids. Instead, Yamaha has proved that there's still a healthy, sustainable, and fun future for sport bikes. I get really jazzed up seeing young guys on R7s going to track days. It's really cool seeing the R9 being piloted out in World Supersport and Moto America. It makes things exciting. This sport can't die. One of the reasons the R7 and R9 worked so well is that they offer better value than the 600 Super Sports that they effectively replaced. The 600 was not just expensive to buy, it was expensive to own. Insurance was high, maintenance was demanding, and they absolutely just ate up consumables like tires, chains, and brake pads. But the R7 and R9 gives you almost all the same fun, but with less cost. The CP2 in the R7 is famously bulletproof. It sips fuel, it's easy on tires, and it rarely needs attention. The CP3 in the R9 is a bit more demanding, but come on, we all know what MT09 squids do with their bikes, and it's pretty crazy these things still turn miles. So the R7 is cheaper, it's easier to get into, the R9 represents better value than what you used to get for the R6. That's a win-win for consumers. You get more seat time for less money, and that means you get more value out of the bike. That value equation was one of the biggest reasons the R7 became a bestseller for Yamaha and why the R9 found an audience so quickly. Riders could finally justify buying a sport bike again. Another reason these bikes mattered is because they gave racing categories what felt like relevance again. Watching MotoGP or World Superbike can be fun, but those bikes on the grids are really far removed from what people can buy. Sometimes it can feel like a totally different sport. With the R7 in Twins Cup and the R9 in the new generation Supersport category, suddenly there was a racing ladder that felt attainable. The bikes you saw on the grid were the same ones you buy at the dealership and the same ones you're seeing at bike nights, the same ones you could bring to a track day. The parts being used were available from the same catalogs you had access to. You can actually go and get the same parts that Moto America racers are using for your R9. That connection matters, and it's one of the reasons the R7 and R9 racing presence helped bring new energy to the sport bike world. Another really smart move Yamaha made with these bikes was basing them on existing proven platforms. The CP2 and the CP3 were already powering many models in Yamaha's lineup. That means the all-important parts availability, reliability, and dealer familiarity were all built in from day one. These aren't exotic bikes, they're not crazy, they use parts that any other bike would be using. So for racers, track days, and sport bike guys who are inevitably going to low side or crash their motorcycles, you can always get parts for them. When you bought an R7, you were buying into the same platform as the MT07, the XSR, and the Tenere 700. When you bought an R9, you're buying the same engine as the MT09 and XSR 900 and the Tracer 9 GT. That platform strategy keeps prices reasonable, kept maintenance simple, and made the bike sustainable for Yamaha to keep developing. It also gave riders the confidence that these bikes were not just one-off experiments, part of a bigger ecosystem. But more than anything, the R7 and R9 changed the way riders talked about what it means to own a sport bike. For decades, the measure of a sport bike was peak horsepower and quarter-mile times. But in the 2020s, those numbers just don't matter as much to people anymore. We've talked about this at length with CF Moto coming through and making bikes that people just want to ride. What matters most is whether the bike was fun, whether it was usable, and whether or not it was price accessible. These two bikes shifted the conversation from how much horsepower does it have to how good does it feel to ride. They taught new riders how to carry corner speed, how to use torque instead of redline power, and how to enjoy track days without the fear of financial ruin. They redefined what sporty meant, and in doing so, they gave the category a new lease on life. So when we look back on the 2020s, I think it's going to be really clear that the R7 and the R9 were the most important bikes of the decade. The R7 legitimized and popularized the Twins class, the R9 is redefining what a supersport can be, and together they allowed Yamaha to gracefully sunset the R6, which we all know is the winningest and most important 600 bike to have ever existed. They widened the funnel for new riders, and they kept the sport bike category from fading away. Look, you might think I'm the biggest Yamaha glazer to have ever glazed, and I'm just simping for no money at all here on the channel for Yamaha R bikes, but I'm not the only one. These bikes are really cool looking and most people like them. They are not the fastest bikes of the decade, they're not the most exotic, but they are the ones that mattered most because they ensured that the world of sport bikes did not just survive the 2020s, it evolved and thrived. I did want to shout out the RS660 though. I do think that bike really keyed off a beautiful spark that allowed all this to happen. But without the R7 and R9, the landscape of sport bike riding today would just look a little emptier. And with them, it looks alive, accessible, and ready for the next generation of riders. Thanks so much for checking out today's video, boys. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this topic, leave me a comment down below, leave a like on the video, and make sure to head over to yamanube.co to get entered to win this Yamaha R9. The sweepstakes is gonna be wrapping up in September. I'm gonna make sure you don't miss it. The next bike up for grabs may be a little controversial, but I've been wanting to talk about it for a long time. Thanks so much for checking out today's video. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.